We have the privilege now to hear from Clark Gilbert, and I will have Barbara Morgan introduce him, and then after his remarks, we'll have her give the closing prayer. And thank you so much for participating. Those that you can see the people have run around to bring lunches upstairs and all those kinds of things. Thank the ones that participated, and hope to see you next year.
I'm going to read from here and then give you a couple of my own personal thoughts. So first of all, we really appreciate Clark coming and being willing to speak with us today. I've really been looking forward to his remarks and his presence as well. So Clark G. Gilbert became the first president of BYU Pathway Worldwide on May 1st, 2017. BYU Pathway Worldwide serves nearly 40,000 students in 500 locations around the world. Prior to his new assignment, he served as the 16th president of Brigham Young University, Idaho. I'm going to jump in there really quick. I was living in Belmont as the institute director and seminary coordinator out there, and I was with a number of friends from the Belmont, Massachusetts ward, and we all heard the news at the same time, and there was happiness all around. It was such a fun moment, and I had met Clark just briefly at a meeting at BYU Idaho and had a conversation with him. I did not know him very well, but was very impressed. But the people in Belmont and those who are involved at Harvard and other places could not stop all the acclamations and telling me what a wonderful person he was and his great work and so much enthusiasm for his presidency at Brigham Young University, Idaho. Brother Gilbert previously served as the CEO of Deseret News Publishing Company and Deseret Digital Media, where he was recognized as the Innovator of the Year by multiple media associations. Early in his career, he was a professor of the entrepreneurial management at the Harvard Business School, where he taught and studied in the field of organizational innovation. He received a bachelor's degree from the Brigham Young University, a master's degree from Stanford University, and a doctorate degree from Harvard Business School. Brother Gilbert was born in California and raised in Arizona. After serving as a missionary for the church in Japan, he married his wife, Christine, and they are the parents of 8 children. On another note, maybe not so personal, but on another note, I've had some conversations with Clark. I've done some interviews with him as well, and not only am I extremely impressed with his intelligence and his ability and his innovations and things of that nature, but of course, as LDS educators, as we're talking, I've been extremely impressed with the heart of which he moves this work forward. I can tell that his motivations are completely pure. He's trying to serve the Lord and he's trying to serve his children. And he is very enthused about what the Lord is having him do as an instrument in his hands. I'm grateful for his qualifications, his skills, for being on this earth in order to fulfill what the Lord would have him to do at this time. He is touching thousands and thousands throughout the world. I'm grateful that the Lord is able to reach these students through wonderful teachers as yourselves, and in this case, especially as Clark Gilbert is doing so. So Clark, we'll turn the time to you. And Clark, it looks like this is our working microphone at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks, Clark. I'm going to, and by the way, do I need to speak into this because of the recording? Can you hear me if I don't? No, you need that, okay. So Lynn's going to get me set up, but just by way of introduction, I'm going to talk for just a minute about the strategy of BYU Pathway, why it was created, how it's growing. But then if it's okay with you, I'm going to get very tactical into some issues around student success and retention and outcomes in some areas that weigh heavily on our thoughts and efforts. And I think are particularly important for the students we serve in BYU Pathway, and we'll go from there. Can you see those slides okay? They're not too bleached out? Well, I think it's the windows. So I'm gonna start out by just showing you a map of the world where all of our pathway sites are located. And let's see, this works. There we go. Today there are over 40,000 students in BYU Pathway. They are located in over 500 locations internationally. Basically, if you look at this map, BYU Pathway looks like a heat map of the church. In other words, everywhere the church is organized, Pathway will be functioning. There are a few quirks in that story, a few places that we've been slower to get to because of some historical abnormalities, and, oh, thank you. And a few places that I'm surprised even now that we have pathway sites there. If you look over here in the Middle East, you'll see all these sites and you say, what in the world are we doing there with pathway sites? Anyone want to guess why we have pathway sites in Saudi Arabia, for example? What? Military? That's a good guess, but it's not military. It's expats, but not from the United States, from the Philippines. Almost all of our students are Filipinos who work for the oil and gas companies and are members of the church in the Middle East. I'm going to just play a little bit of a game here. By the way, before I do that, the last line on this slide is really, really important. And as you look at the design of BYU Pathway and how it's been structured, this is a foundational statement about the strategy of the organization and why the church actually was willing to invest in the creation of a new educational arm in BYU Pathway. It says BYU Pathway was created to work wherever the church is organized. So the model we have isn't built just to work in South Jordan, Utah, or Rexburg, Idaho. It has to work everywhere the church is organized. Everywhere where you see a dot on this chart, BYU Pathway has to work there. And so that has real implications for design, for structure, for degree offerings. Everything flows out of that foundational strategic statement that went to the Church Board of Education. Let's just play a little game here for a second. It's called Name That Pathway Location. Anyone want to guess where this group is from?
Everywhere.
No, they're all from one country. This is the Dominican Republic, Santo Domingo. We were there, or I was there right before Christmas, and just amazing to feel the energy in the pathway sites there. In fact, everywhere you go in the world, you can feel it. How many of you have been to a pathway site before? Anyone in this room been to? So quite a few. You walk in, and the defining characteristic is this emerging hope that you see in the students. This next group here, how about this one? Any guesses?
Alaska.
It's the United States, Ohio. I'm still not sure where they got all those matching pathway shirts, John. But, okay, how about this one?
Ghana.
No? This is Rexburg, Idaho. No, this is Port-au-Prince in Haiti, okay? And it was interesting, on that same trip to the DR, you could just, I mean, I went to Port-au-Prince first, and then we took the little, short plane hop over the mountain there and went to the DR, and I felt like leaving Port-au-Prince and going into the DR, I felt like I'd entered Switzerland. And the DR was so much more functional. Roads worked, street lights worked, it was clean, there was fluid traffic, there were jobs, there was commerce happening. In Haiti, it was just absolutely dysfunctional. There were no straight lights. For miles on either side of the road, piles of garbage. In fact, some of my area managers who work in international areas of the church and have seen lots of poverty in Africa and Asia say they haven't seen anything like what we experience in Haiti. And yet, when you walked into the pathway sites, you could just feel this brilliant energy from the students. How about this last one? India, yep. In fact, this is where the temple was just announced in Bengaluru. So all these pathway sites, by the way, we show all these sites all over the world. Anyone know what the largest pathway site in the world is? Orem, Utah. Yeah, there's over 1,000. John, how many students in the Orem site in both locations
We
there?
served over 1,000 students last year.
1,000 students just in the Orem site. So I want to talk to you a little bit about why the program is growing so fast and what BYU Pathway's done to unlock constraints to education. About almost 10 years ago, Elder Clark asked us to look at not the growth of BYU Idaho, but the growth, how can we grow to reach people who not only wouldn't come to Rexburg or Provo or Laia or Salt Lake, but maybe weren't going to college at all, and what was keeping them from getting an education. And, well, I just put the first one up there, but what do you think were the top constraints to education? Cost? Time was a big one. Location was a big one, but someone said fear. Yeah, fear was actually the number 2, and we think the number 1 reason. And in fact, we would talk to students and we'd read quotes from the prophet about the importance of education. And by the way, as a people, where do you think we rank in the United States of religious groups? Pew Research did a study of religious groups, and way up at the top are Orthodox Jews and Hindus. Where do you think the church falls? Bottom, top, middle? What do you think? Upper middle class, if that's the equivalent. We're not really high, but we're well above halfway. But this statistic always surprises people. More than 60% of the US church doesn't have a bachelor's degree. And so when we talk about BYU Pathway and who it's meant to reach, it's over half the church just in the United States. And this is cost and fear. We're always number 1 and 2. And we'd ask the students, why aren't you, we read a quote from President Monson, get all the education you can get. Or from President Uchtdorf, for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, getting an education is not just a good idea, it's a commandment. Right? From Russell and Nelson, President Nelson, education is a spiritual responsibility of members of the church. We'd read these quotes and then talk to the 60% in the US who weren't getting educated and say, well, why aren't you doing it? And yeah, cost would be up there, but fear was, I can't make it. I'm not good enough. That statement's for other people. Now remember that when I show you a slide later in this presentation. And then the last one was, well, I love to do it, but I can't relocate to Idaho. Like I live in Ohio or Manhattan. I remember in our first focus group in Manhattan, I talked to a Jamaican immigrant, and with tears in her eyes when we described the program, she said, you mean I can keep taking care of my mom here and go to BYU Idaho? Right? And so the design of the program is actually built in its very architecture to address these constraints. So on cost, it's extremely affordable. It's around $70 a credit hour. That's about half of most community colleges. And that's domestically. Internationally, the average price is about $25 a credit hour. Fear, the entire design of the curriculum, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this today, is to build confidence. So if you look at, I've gotten to the point where I'm so frustrated with most of higher education because it's either a filter or a remediation program is the path into college. And at BYU Pathway, we took a fundamentally different approach, which was this curriculum is going to help you build the confidence you need to be successful. It's not going to filter you out, and it's not going to remediate you. Nothing tells someone you have confidence in them like saying, I'm going to put you in a remedial program, right? But that's what we do in most. In fact, the very design of higher education is designed actually to screen out these students and to make them feel like they can't be successful. And then the third one is, because it's online and you can gather in an institute, like that map showed, suddenly we can offer BYU Pathway anywhere the church is organized. So 3 kind of archetype constraints to education, and then the design of the program is meant to pull those away so students could access higher education. Now I'm going to show you some charts of the church educational system. This top line is BYU campus semester headcount. And anyone want to guess what the dip is in that? Lowering of the missionary age. And unfortunately, when they go out, they do come back, so you can't keep your enrollments there because they'll create chaos when they get back. And so there was the dip and then the recovery. What year was BYU Idaho created? Anyone know? Out of Ricks College. Announced in 2000, formally created in 2001. In fact, if you go back to 1999, President Hinckley announced in the priesthood session of General Conference that we won't be building any more universities. And then in 2000 he said, except for this one, and he created BYU Idaho. But he created it on a very, very different model, and I want to show you what that model is allowed to happen. By the way, this headcount's been capped since the 80s at BYU. But when he created BYU Idaho, this is what happened over the ensuing years. And whether it's next year or the year after, BYU Idaho will pass the enrollment of BYU and it will keep going. It's got a model that's very different than the model of BYU. Anyone want? At its core, there's one simple design choice that President Hinckley ascribed to BYU Idaho that made everything else follows from that. Anyone want to guess what it was? What? Well, it's open in enrollment because of this design choice. Tracks? It's tract oriented because of this design choice. All these are derivatives of one fundamental design choice by President Hinckley. What? That's a derivative. That's a good, I mean, these are all why BYU Idaho's model is so innovative. But there's just an archetype design choice. Like I said, BYU Pathway has a design rule behind it, which is it's built to work wherever the church is organized. Everything else is a derivative from that decision by the Church Board of Education. There's one derivative that all of the innovations at BYU Idaho come from. Teaching focused. That's it. And in fact, if you want to go up one level higher, it's student focused. So there isn't a dollar spent at that university that isn't spent toward the education of a student. That means lots. So now all the things you said become derivatives out of that. In fact, President Hinckley, when he made the announcement, outlined all this. When I got called as the president of BYU Idaho, President Uchtdorf extended the assignment. And I thought it was going to be a mission call because if it was going to go back to BYU Idaho, I thought it would be President Eyring because he's former commissioner of church education and he'd been a life mentor to me. And so when it was President Uchtdorf and he said, bring your wife, I knew we were in trouble, but I didn't know what it was, and we thought we were getting a mission call. And I said that to President Eyring. I said, we were surprised. You didn't extend the call. And President Eyring said, yeah, if I would have called you, I would have just told you everything you needed to do. But since you're here, and then he went on for an hour, right? And in that meeting, he said, Elder Bednar and Elder Clark will tell you about the 3-track system and the year-round calendar and the learning model and online learning and teaching-oriented faculty and all these design elements of BYU Idaho. And he said, and they've done a nice job. But all of those came from President Hinckley. And they're in a one-page announcement. And that's what's allowed that to go because the actual cost to the church in real dollars have not increased that entire time. So just think about that for a minute. So a new model that was teaching focused, student focused, no athletics, no graduate programs, no faculty assignments tied to anything but teaching and advising students allowed you to dramatically lower the cost while actually being more focused on the student. Average class size is 30, there's no auditorium classrooms. You have to look far and wide to find a room this big on the campus of BYU Idaho. And that allowed tremendous growth in the church educational system for what had actually been capped for over 25 years. Then in 2009, we piloted Pathway. Again, with a very different design model. It's got a design rule that fundamentally was different and would actually, for the first time, make BYU Idaho look like a very expensive cost structure for serving the church. Because what changed with BYU Pathway was it would be done online. We'd gather in an institute. You wouldn't build new buildings. You wouldn't have a full-time faculty. It would all be taught by online adjunct faculty online across the whole world. And this is what's happened, the growth of BYU Pathway in that period. So today, and in fact it was interesting, in the little introduction it says almost 40,000 students. My team told me today they think we're going to be at 44,000 students as we close out this year. Now I've got to figure out how to explain that to the board because we're ahead of forecast, but there's just tremendous hope and demand happening all across the church. And almost everywhere you go, you're going to meet someone, if you don't already know someone, who's in the Pathway program. Now, with that growth came the announcement of a new institution. So I want you to think about this for a second. When I was at BYU Idaho here, this was happening. And we knew this was happening, but the lines hadn't crossed yet. And toward the end of 2016, I came home from a meeting with the board and I sat down with my wife. We put the kids to bed, read scriptures, had prayers, and then we were just sitting there writing in our journals. Christine's about to fall asleep, and I said, I think we're going to be asked to leave BYU Idaho and go to Salt Lake. And she, and all of a sudden she was about to fall asleep, and now she sits back up and it says, that can't be. And I said, I think the church is going to want to look at this separately. It's not going to tuck a 40,000 student organization under another 30,000 student organization. The brethren need to see it. They want it to be transparent. They want to understand it. And I think we're going to be asked to leave and go do it. And this was the day of the announcement. You can see here, it says the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has announced the creation of a global higher education organization, BYU Pathway Worldwide. The institution will have responsibility for all online certificate and degree programs offered by the church educational system. And that same day, about 70 employees in BYU, what was then Pathway, not BYU Pathway, found out about this during the broadcast. So Nathan Relkin, who's right here, Lynn Anderson, John Wilson, am I missing anyone? Steve didn't know what it meant yet, but all found out during a live stream that we had just been moved to Salt Lake. At my inauguration at BYU Idaho, President Uchtdorf said this: today's challenges cannot be solved by yesterday's tools. Now, I'm going to walk you through, so anyway, I'm going to stop there for a second. What time am I at? I'm going to stop there for a second and I'm going to pivot here in this presentation. But any questions you have about BYU Pathway itself, how it's organized, what it does, because I'm going to go deep here in just a second, but are there any general questions? Yes?
I'd like to know, do you have graduation? Are people graduating? What percentage of those who start? Or is it more about, I just want to take a couple classes on?
No. So this is very different, for example, than an independent study course where it's personal enrichment. This is a degree track program. You really have two components. Pathway Connect, which is the preparation program to matriculate into college, and then the degree programs, which start with certificates. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. So about half our students are in each category. Half are in Pathway Connect and half are in the online degree programs. The degrees are awarded from BYU Idaho. The degree structure and advising and mentoring is done by BYU Pathway. Yes? Yeah, the question was, where are the teachers located? There are about, Steve, Lynn, what are we, about 2,000 online instructors. 500 of them are dedicated assignments to Pathway Connect, the preparation program, and then the rest are shared across the BYU Idaho instructor pool. And they're all over the US. I don't believe we have any internationally yet. And we have like 4 states left that we don't have approvals to have hired instructors from. But they're all over from the US at this point.
But do you have volunteers?
We do have volunteers for our language speaking program, but the instructors have to have a master's degree, have to go through our online instructor training, and get evaluated every semester. So, and they are paid. Yes?
So all these international sites, they meet in the Institute building, but their instructors are in the US.
That's right. So the structure of the program, you're in an online course, but on Thursday night, so every night, last night, everywhere in 500 and plus locations around the world, you gathered with a peer cohort and a missionary couple and worked through structured activities that are pre-assigned for peer learning efforts. So there is no on-site instructor, the instructor's inside the online course. Yes?
What are your gender breakdowns of students?
It's different, international versus domestic. Domestic, it's about 60% female. In fact, and that's tilted heavily by the 30 plus category, which is like 70% female. So this is going to have a dramatic impact on the degree attainment of sisters in the U.S. church. In the international church, it tilts back just barely to male. And by the way, it's about a third that 18 to 21 year old, about a third, 21 to 30, and about a third adult learners. Yes?
Are all the students LDS?
No, we just received approval from the board to have limited numbers of non-LDS students if they're in part member families, are meeting with missionaries, or have some other tie to the church. But it is 98% LDS. Yes?
So Pathways doesn't go beyond a bachelor's degree?
No. And in fact, we only offer 5 bachelor's degrees because of this commitment that will work wherever the church is organized. So our focus is really heavy on Pathway Connect and getting you to your first certificate. And I'll show you in a minute, students who get that far almost self-persist at rates that are actually, at that point, as high as any university in the world. I mean, it's phenomenal after that point. But we focus on those two. And if you want to specialize, we think that's great. But in my inaugural response, we made a commitment to the board that we would have a focus on the on-ramp and access. And so we have an applied management, applied technology, applied healthcare, marriage and family studies, and professional studies degree. But we have 25 different specialized certificates that all stack. Yes?
I remember in the press release they talked about English being an obstacle to.
Yes.
How do you deal with that?
So the question was about English as an on-ramp to the program internationally. We'll go into a kickoff devotional where we describe the program, and we'll have, in Chile, 500 people, and in Philippines, 2,000 people at some of these events, and then they take the English test, and we lose half. We're working with, in fact, Heather Porter, who's back here, is the director over the English Connect program for the church, and it's a cross-departmental program with missionary department and self-reliant services and Pathway, BYU Pathway, that has 3 courses that kind of layer you toward being able to enter Pathway Connect. And that's rolling out right now. In fact, I was editing a letter on the drive down here. Don't turn me in. Okay, any other questions? And I'm going to keep moving. Okay. All right. So why do you think we need different tools for this program? Right? If you go to BYU Idaho, what's the biggest difference, do you think, between a faculty assignment at BYU and BYU Idaho, based on what we just talked about?
Research.
No research at BYU Idaho. There's one thing you're supposed to be good at BYU Idaho, teaching. In fact, Henry J. Eyring and Clay Christensen wrote this book called The Innovative University, looking at BYU Idaho, and people all over the country would say, oh, I've heard about all this stuff you're doing at BYU Idaho, and I'd say, yeah, we are cutting edge. At BYU Idaho, we want our faculty to be good. Like, no, get ready for this. Teaching. This is revolutionary. But that's our focus. And so you hire for teaching, you develop for teaching, you evaluate for teaching. There's one job, right? And that's worked really well. You saw that growth chart, right? Tremendous outcomes, tremendous cost efficiency for the church. So why wouldn't you just use that model for what we're doing with BYU Pathway? Why did the board make us all leave Rexburg? What do you think?
Well, the church is worldwide, and it's growing, and that's why.
Okay, so part of it is perhaps tied to the worldwide nature of the church. What else do you think?
It's not face-to-face as far as physical, it's all internet.
Okay, it's all online learning with local gatherings, and it turns out that a whiteboard behind a professor is a really bad metaphor for an online course. Okay, so that's definitely another part of it. Can you think of anything else? Think about the students. I haven't shown you a lot about our students yet.
Just thinking about how my own students learn, they're always connected to technology nowadays. It's just that you mentioned 18, it's that generation.
Okay, so they're connected to this everywhere they go, right? They have their textbooks with them wherever they go. Assuming all the textbooks are digital, right? Steve, how long did it take us to get BYU Idaho to give us everything digitally?
10 years.
10 years, right? We had books in Bolivia and, sitting in customs, right? But you don't need them to be digital. Sorry, you don't need them to be digital if the book is, 1/10 the cost of the tuition. But at $25 a credit hour, if I have a $75 book, it's more than the course, right? So the very structure of the delivery system is different. Can you think about anything else? Just think about the student profile. Yeah.
They work, they got jobs, they can't come to a campus at the same time.
The day you register for BYU Idaho and show up in class on the first day, or BYU or LAIA, or what have you also done probably? Moved, quit your job, signed a housing contract. You're kind of locked in, right? First night of Pathway, we've made everyone in BYU Pathway go to the first night over and over and over of Pathway. And the first night, the missionary couples there explaining the course, and they're like, everyone flip open your laptops and open the course. And people are looking around like, where's the course? And they don't know how to log in. They don't know what a student ID is. They don't know where the course is located. They're not even sure they want to do this. In fact, in a lot of cases, the bishop said, hey, Julia, you ought to go to BYU Pathway. The stake president in the interview after the mission said, hey, Elder Smith, where are you going to college? I don't have plans for college. You need to go to Pathway. Or it's, as we often hear with a lot of our adult learners, honey, you need a better job. Go to Pathway, right? I remember I went to the Ogden site one night, and this guy was in there, and he said, it was the graduating night. They'd been through the whole year of Pathway Connect. And he said, I told this group I would be here for 2 weeks. And because that's what I told my wife I'd commit to. And then I was out of here, right? And that group put their arm around him and they said, you will not quit. But adult learners are very, very different than campus learners, right? And so there's a fundamental pivot from residential to adult, from physical campus to online learning. And it just looks very different. So we could spend more time on that, but this is, you're right on. I want to talk about a looming crisis in higher education. This chart shows college completers in the United States. On the top line is people in the highest quartile. So if your mom and dad were in the top quartile of income, so just over $100,000, $108,000 I think. If they made that much money in your home, your odds of completing college are 58%. By the way, this isn't starting college, this isn't going to college, this is completing, okay? And in 1970 it was 40%, and we've climbed to 18 points over that time to 58%. What do you think it looks like if your parents were in the bottom quartile? So 12%. Now the good news is we're up from 6%, but in 35 years, we've only added 6 percentage points onto this, despite literally billions of investment from the federal government, massive subsidies, tons of academic attention, and the truth is, the US higher education system is designed to filter out the very student who we are actually going back and reaching through BYU Pathway. And everything in the way it's designed is broken. From what you take the first semester of college, to how we support you through college, to the use of words like remediation. The very structure of it says, and in fact, every time I do this, I'll offend someone and they'll say, oh, that's not true. Well, just look at the data. And in a minute, I'm going to show you data that suggests it is not a capability gap. It's a cultural gap. It's an assimilation gap. It's an onboarding gap. But ironically, there's not actually a very big potential gap in the capability of the students. When you open up access to higher education, you increase the risk profile of a student population. So in BYU Pathway, almost 70% of our students are on that line. Especially if you look at our international skew in the data. And in fact, at BYU Idaho, we used to model risk in the student population. And every once in a while, I'll hear someone at BYU Idaho say, well, we're open enrollment. That's not true. What are two things you have to do to go to BYU Idaho? That means it is not open enrollment. There's actually 3.
Live there.
Okay, 4, you have to live there. But admission requirements. You have to take the ACT with a 16 or higher. And you have to have an ecclesiastical endorsement. Okay? You do not have to have an ecclesiastical endorsement to start Pathway Connect. You do to go into the online degree program. But Pathway Connect has become not only a pathway to education, but also a path back to the church. Literally for thousands of students across the church. I had an Area 70 in Arizona say, I asked him, hey, Elder so-and-so, do you know about BYU Pathway? And he said, oh yeah, we had a daughter at BYU. And I said, great. And he said, but we have a son in Pathway, and it rescued him. Right? And I've had bishops tell me, I had a friend in Southern California say, Clark, I've sent 9 people in my ward to Pathway Connect, and they're physically different. You see it in their countenance, the way they hold their shoulders, the way they carry themselves, the way they talk. Something fundamentally changes as they go through the program. And we used to model risk at BYU Idaho, and I'd end up with like 18% that would check off 2 or more of these factors. First generation college student, below the poverty level, academically at risk. And we go through these things, and it'll be about 18% of the student body. Well, it's 70% of the pathway students, right? And the ones who don't check that are adult learners who are not in those categories, but their mom's going back to school in their 30s. And if you don't think that's risky with 4 kids at home, that's a new form of risk. You're an adult learner and summer vacation's coming, and your kids are like, Mom, why are you in class? Right? Why are you working every night on your course? We want to go to the park. We want to go to Lagoon. You know, what are you doing? Right? And so that's our population. And so with increased access, there's increased student risk. We look at student risk in two core categories. One is what we call native risk factors. The day they start with us, what risk do they bring into the experience? Are they first generation college student? Are they in the bottom quartile of family income? Is English not their native language? Are they from a single parent home? Do they have mental or physical disabilities that they're dealing with? Then there's a category we call behavioral risk. These are things we can actually see. What's the current GPA? When's the last time they logged into the course? Have they failed to register in a timely manner relative to deadlines? Have they completed their graduation plan? Have they engaged in the tutoring center? These are things that show us ahead of time that maybe something's wrong before a student might drop or give up. At BYU Pathway, we have a phrase that says, retention is everyone's responsibility. So, you know, what do you think that means? Why do we say that? Why is retention everyone? We have a mentoring team I'm going to talk about in a minute, but why is this everyone's responsibility, not just our mentors? Where do you think students struggle in their experience? What? Connecting to people? Someone said?
In class, with the content.
The content, course design, right? What else?
Every step is a potential.
Registration, right? We just got done reading these studies by a member of the church who's at Stanford University, named Eric Bedinger, and he looks at freshman melt, the number of students who academically qualified, admitted, and have financial aid out of high school, but don't show up in the fall. And it turns out that nationwide, the summer melt is about 7%. If you're back on this line, by the way, that jumped from 7 to 25%. And yet, if you have a mentor, that almost disappears. Okay? So, what am I doing on time? Okay. I'm going to just skip this for now. 3 areas we're focused on retention and student success inside of BYU Pathway. The first is curriculum design. The second is what we call stall points. And the third is targeted interventions. And I'm just going to click through these and then I'll close with some thoughts. On curriculum design, I said earlier, the curriculum is designed to build spiritual and academic confidence. In fact, that is the defining feature. When you walk into a Pathway site, what's changed is for the first time they feel like someone believes in them. For the first time they feel like they can do it, okay? The curriculum in Pathway Connect has 3 core courses: life skills, professional skills, and college skills. You also enroll in Institute, and you take Institute for credit. But the core academic courses are life skills, professional skills, and college skills. Then inside of each one of those are curriculum design that has these additional learning outcomes. First of all, we're going to make sure you understand why education matters. The students look at income differentials, quality of life differentials, spiritual reasons for education. We help build a connection to the institution, both BYU Pathway and BYU Idaho. They identify a job skill and a program path during the first year curriculum. And I'll talk about why that's so important in a second. We develop core learning skills. They engage in what we call the BYU Idaho learning model. And we have specific curriculum designed to build grit and confidence in the curriculum. We also teach quantitative reasoning. I can't tell you how many people in BYU Pathway quit college because they had a couple of math classes required to graduate, right? And so one of the things we do is we teach quantitative reasoning, but instead of having a math class, which is how we started, which came right out of the model of a traditional university, the math now weaves all the way through the curriculum. So in the professional skills course, we have them calculate income differentials for different income. We have them calculate the lifetime value of earning a degree. So we're teaching the importance of education while we're also teaching quantitative math skills. Same thing's true with writing and communication. Instead of having a course on freshman English where you write a narrative essay, we have the students write a cover letter, write an introductory email, fill out a LinkedIn profile. They learn to edit, they learn syntax and sentence structure and communication skills, but it's in the context of something they'll use. What's interesting about this design, there's a, let's see, what's his title? It's the Provost and Academic Vice President at the University of Georgia system. And they've done a whole, it's this group of mathematicians at the University of Georgia who've studied freshman persistence. And it turns out, if the following things happen, the odds you complete college go up 3 to 4 times. Perceived purpose of education. Does this sound familiar? Feel connected to their institution. Believe they're capable of learning the material. Confidence in interacting with faculty and staff. Identified a work interest and a baseline skill during your freshman year. By the way, it doesn't say study Beowulf and do your general education, which is, by the way, again, we're trying not to belabor this, but we are sole focused on this line right here. And it turns out the rest of the US higher education system isn't. And this is what, Tristan Denley, in fact, he says, we admit every year into the University of Georgia system a perfect demographic map, a picture of the state of Georgia. Then we graduate a completely different population, right? And so that's why they're looking at this. And turns out if you identify a job skill early in your career, instead of the model we use in most of higher education, which is college is a polishing school, so I can spend 2 years doing GE, because in fact, I'm not even gonna get my job out in my 4 years. I'm gonna go on to a graduate program in law or business or engineering, right? And so this is a fundamental difference, and you'll hear me talk more about that. Functional writing and quantitative reasoning and grit and persistence. It's like we've been talking to Tristan Denley for 5 years and we've never met him. Now I want to show you this. This is our online academic performance in the same courses. These aren't different courses with different instructors. The BYU Pathway students and the BYU Idaho campus students are co-enrolled in the same online courses. So about 1 in 5 courses at BYU Idaho are taught online. This is the data from those courses. So here, this red line here is what we call our online standard. These are our adult 30-plus students, typically, who started at Ricks College or BYU Idaho or even BYU LDS BC and had 15 credits and want to come back and finish. They've typically been our best students. But this green line are the students who came through Pathway. Remember, what was the number 2 reason why they didn't go after a college education? Fear. I can't do it. Who has the highest performance on this chart? I want you to think about that for a minute. This is 60% of the US church who said, I can't do it. And they outperform our online standard students on the red line, and the blue line are our campus students taking online courses. So this is the most inspiring and infuriating slide I have in this whole deck, right? Because they could do it. It's just, and by the way, a lot of them started in other schools and dropped out. Yes?
So this is just the online, this isn't the actual campus classes, because a lot of colleges, don't they have the, what is it, the grade inflation or whatever, where they've got a grade on the curve and they can't give so many A's or whatever?
That's not relevant at BYU Idaho. But the campus and online, I guess I could throw campus on here too, but it would be right where that blue line is. Yeah?
Don't you think it's because the blue line they're dating and the green line they've been married?
Yes. Well, the red line is married more often, and the green line's more of an even distribution, but that's a great point. So, okay, I'm gonna try to keep going. The next thing in the degree structure, and you know what, I'm gonna end with this one and then share some closing thoughts, is I mentioned to you in Tristan Denley's, what's one of the things he said you have to know about your education early on?
Baseline skill.
You have to have a baseline skill. If you take a first-generation college student, someone who's never been to college, doesn't have a pattern of knowing college is important, they're now out of the workforce or reducing their workforce exposure or doing this while they're working, and you present 2 years of curriculum that has no market value, all the prereqs and all the Gs, how many job postings do you see out there that says, we're looking for someone who's finished their GEs? All GE completers, please apply, right? And for 2 years you're doing that. What do you think happens to the odds they drop out? Right, that's back to that graphic I showed where it's only come up to 12%, because that is the experience for most Americans going to college, which they enter a program in a university that was not designed for them, right? If you parents went to college, if your parents are helping pay for college, and you got 2 years of like taking American heritage and physical science and, you know, and you're not really sure what that's gonna do, but you know college is important. And someone's helping you get through, you keep going. But if you don't know that, the biggest drop-off of our at-risk population is in the freshman year. And it's for exactly these reasons. So now, the alternative to that is, go get a terminal job certificate. Go to Davis Applied Technical College. In fact, Davis Applied Technical College, if you graduate in their machining program or their diesel engine program or their truck driving program, you make more than about 60% of the majors at most universities as you leave college. But why do you think a lot of the students, why don't they go do this? It's counterintuitive, but why don't a lot of students do this? What's the first word there? What do you think happens when you tell someone the best you're ever going to be able to do is this job skill? They just don't start, because you just took away all their hope. So ironically, it leads to better outcomes than most college students or bachelor students, and yet most people don't do it, even though sometimes these programs are only a year long, right? You can have a Davis Applied Technical College, they have got programs where you make 70 grand a year coming out of the program, and people don't start it because you took away their hope. And by the way, what do you think the other universities say about those credits? We're not counting those, right? So, or you can go to the four-year school, and what's the first 2 years of your college about? GEs and prereqs, right? Then maybe there's an associate, more likely not, and even if it's there, it's like, it's not part of the dialogue, right? You look at 2-year schools who went to bachelor's, just watch. I won't name any specific colleges, just pick any one of them. Within 5 years, the associate means nothing inside the culture of that community, okay? And then way out there is the bachelor's degree. So at BYU Pathway, we go through Pathway Connect, and the very first thing you do out of that, your very first matriculated college credit, is a certificate. 15 credit hours, 5 classes. We tell the students, give me 5. Okay, good job, you've completed Pathway Connect. You've learned how to learn, you've built your confidence, you know how the online courses work. Give me 5 more classes. You're gonna get a job skill. Internationally, we see 70–80% get a better job. The median increase is a doubling of income. Domestically, the typical response is going from part-time to full-time with benefits. So just give me 5 classes, right? And if you do that, then we'll go on and do your bachelor's degree. And unlike the one on the top, we don't say, well, give me a job, I'm gonna get you a job skill, but it doesn't have anything to do with your bachelor's. Every credit stacks into the bachelor's degree. We have a philosophy, no credit left behind, right? Every credit stacks in the bachelor's degree. So it's different than down below, but it has the benefits of the one up above, and it's providing tremendous impact across the church. Now, I'm gonna just show you one other thing. What do you think happens to the students who complete a certificate, to their odds of going on further? Up, right? Our persistence during the first year is about 65%. Once you complete a certificate, it jumps to 86%. Now, some of that's self-selection. The gritty, persistent students are more likely to be in that next pool. But some of that is, hey, I just achieved a milestone. And guess what? If I'm international, I have a 70-80% chance it just doubled my income. And if I'm domestic, I just have a 70-80% chance that I move out of part-time to full-time work. They've been telling me for a year education pays. I actually believe them. Plus I have a milestone. I felt a sense of accomplishment. So this is a phenomenal breakthrough. Now I'm out of time. I'm not gonna, there's some fun stuff in here. If we had another 2 hours, I would have, I don't know what I was thinking. Okay, targeted intervention, that's a fun slide. Okay, so I'm gonna come to, by the way, let me just tell you about this. This is really exciting. We started a mentoring program with all the students. And we piloted in Salt Lake under John Wilson and Mexico under our area managers there. And in fall of 16, we had 63% persistence. That jumped to 75% with the mentoring program. In Mexico, 55 to 64. Some really exciting things about having someone there supporting you through the process. But I wanted to close with why are we doing this? And this is where I'll wrap up with these 2 slides. The church loves education. We have a culture of education. I've got a painting of Ken Baxter's ship in the docks in Liverpool, the saints boarding, heading to the US, and I love it because it reminds me that the early converts to this church were poor, uneducated immigrants. And yet, they came to this valley, they built over 50 academies, they built the University of Utah, BYU, what became Rick's College, and then BYU Idaho. The gospel lifted them up. We're not a people who love education because it's just a cultural phenomenon or quirk about our history. We're people who love education because when you're converted to the gospel of Jesus Christ, you want to be better. You want to improve yourself. You want to lift yourself. And at BYU Pathway, the mission is to develop disciples of Jesus Christ who are leaders in their homes, the church, and their communities. That's why the church is investing in this. Education is important, but it is a subset of the deeper purposes of this. And I love this statement from President Nelson. He said, pathways for the kingdom. It's not for BYU or BYU Idaho. It's not even for the church educational system. It was hard to take Pathway away from BYU Idaho. It was hard for those of us who had to leave, but it was also hard for those at BYU Idaho who loved it. But President Nelson taught us that Pathway is for the kingdom. That means everywhere it goes, its job isn't just to educate the church or provide low-cost, affordable education for people who can't afford it. Its job is to change the church. And as we conclude here, I'll just share that closing thought that those of us who love education, I hope we love it because we have a cultural tradition of it. We love to learn. We're intellectually curious. We like to see the growth in other people who we work with. We love when the light goes on in a student's mind or a child's mind that we're working with. But in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, our commitment to education is much, much deeper. And as described by President Nelson in that statement, Pathway for the Kingdom, is a deeper insight about the reason we're committed to education in this gospel. I want to just share my testimony that I know that the Lord is preparing his church for the second coming. He's hastening his work in temples. He's hastening his work in missionary gathering. He's also hastening his work by educating his people so we'll be prepared for the return of the Savior. It's happening all across the church. It's a miracle. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.